What is going on, college football world? We're back. It's week 7. It's week 7, college football world. That means we have more DFS to talk about. As always, it's your host, JD Yonke, at YonkerCFB on Twitter, here with Daily Bread Media. Very excited to get into another slate here. We're going to break down DraftKings main slate, $50,000 going to first place. So we're going to break that down for you. We have a two-game slate Thursday night. I think it's a 2-game slate Friday night as well. Nothing major. And then the big one coming on Saturday. So as usual, we're going to break down all those games here for you. As always, subscribe, Daily Bread Media on YouTube. That's where these videos have been at all year. This is going to be a solo pod today. It's going to be a solo pod. No Kevin. He's under the weather. We'll have him back next week. So without any further ado, let's get to what you came here for. All right. Game number 1, Auburn versus Ole Miss. A little bit of a stinker here to start the slate. A little bit of a stinker. 13.5 point spread in favor of Ole Miss. That seems right, if not short. Over-unders at 55.5, so there could be a little bit of scoring here. Maybe we're going to have a one-off. Starting with Auburn, there's not going to be much interesting to talk about here with Auburn. Why? Because Auburn stinks. They're going to fire Brian Harsin. They're playing with a lame duck head coach. Anytime you're playing with a lame duck head coach, anything can happen. And usually it's not anything good. So not a big fan of Auburn, as most have realized by now. Probably should have realized in the offseason, but if you're too late, that's okay. They stink. So in offense, they're 90th in success rate. They can't throw the ball whatsoever. Their offensive line stinks. They're 122nd in line yards, 127th in stuff rate. That's bottom 10 and bottom 5 in both of those. So I don't know where you're expecting to get, because my outlook on Auburn in the offseason was in order for this team to be any good, you're going to have to run the ball. In order to do that, you have 2 good running backs. Your offensive line is going to need to be good, and they aren't. So going against the good Ole Miss defense, I don't really consider anyone here, even though they do have 2 really good running backs. Jarquez Hunter is priced all the way down at 4.4K. I don't really know why you would get there for a guy who's getting about 5 carries a game, but he is one of my favorite players in college football, and I hope he breaks a long run because I really enjoy watching him play. Robbie Ashford, former Oregon baseball player and backup Oregon quarterback, is now the heir apparent at Auburn. He can run a little bit, and he's 5.2K, so I guess people have done crazier things. Auburn has an embarrassing wide receiver core by SEC standards, so please do not even consider them. All right, looking at the other side here, looking at the Auburn rush defense. So Ole Miss is a top, I believe they're top 4 rushing in the country. Their metrics are amazing, so that's immediately where our interest is going to go here with Ole Miss. They rank 7th in rushing PPA, 13th in success rate, 13th in explosiveness. They've moved the chains, and they've been explosive. They have been fantastic. The Auburn rush defense has actually been pretty good. The 119 yards they allowed against Penn State is the most they've given up in the last 4 weeks, and even that wasn't such a bad performance in its own right. Sorry, that was bad stats here. That was Auburn's offense. Totally out of whack. Sorry, solo show. I think they're going to be able to do what they want to this Auburn defense. Let's check out the stats. Rushing PPA, 88th. Rushing success rate, 80th. 78th in explosiveness. Auburn's not good. As far as looking at the running backs, the issue with Ole Miss is that they do spread the carries out. So either way here, Zach Evans, I really love this kid, Zach Evans. People have been taking a moment to piss on his grave when he's been injured with the hip. So F those people. Please don't be seeing any of that on my timeline, or you're probably going to get muted. He's been injured, and people are just kind of piling on him because they have a one-track mind, and they can't figure out how to praise Quinshon Judkins without bringing down Zach Evans. They're both amazing. They're both awesome. Evans outrushed Judkins last week, but Judkins still got there with 2 touchdowns. Was in a nice lineup of mine. I had a little takedown there, and Judkins was in it. So thank you for getting your 2 touchdowns. I think these guys' prices are fine. The issue is they're going to split the workload, right? So as a favorite, I think you can get to either one. I think they're all secondary plays here. I don't really love any of them. Looking at the wide receiving core, Jonathan Mingo had an absolutely baller week last week, 247 yards and 2 touchdowns. My issue is before that, the most receptions he had in the game was 3. They just don't throw the ball all that often. And when you run the ball like they do as 13.5 point favorites, I don't really know why that would change here. But with that big of a blow up, and with Jackson Dart I love this kid Jackson Dart at quarterback, right? But he has all the tools, but hasn't really found a comfort zone. If he is starting to get comfortable in Lane Kiffin's offense, that's one thing. But I will say it was Vanderbilt. I'm not going to read too much into it personally. So if you want to take a flyer on Mingo, that's not too bad. He only has 34 targets in 6 games. The workload's just not what I would like to see. And Malik Heath also has the same amount of targets. So it's kind of like they're sharing duties. So nothing too interesting for me in that game. What's up, Brett? How we doing? Able to get Miles Price on the waiver week. Yeah, if you're in a league with someone dropping Miles Price, good job getting in that league. That's all I'll say. That's good stuff. Going to come back and listen to the show after the UCF game. I'm missing that one. They're playing Temple. I'm kind of mad. I have a few lineups going, so report back. UCF defense going. Well, going against Temple should be a pretty nice night for you there. All right, Kansas, Oklahoma. Weird game. 2 weird teams. So let's start with Kansas's offense. They're 9-point underdogs, over under 62.5. So should be some good offense here, you would think, because Kansas mostly has gotten into shootouts. Other than that 14-11 game against Iowa State, there've been a lot of shootouts, right? This week, they're going to be playing with their backup quarterback, Jalen Daniels. Who knows if he's out for the year or not? He seems to disagree with the tweet that said he was out for the year, but he is out for this game. So that means Jason Bean's going to be your starting quarterback. Good news is he's playing a terrible Oklahoma defense that ranks outside the top 100 in PPA, success rate, standard downs PPA, standard down success rate, rushing PPA, rushing success rate, rushing explosiveness, line yards, and stuff rate. Bottom 10 in line yards. That's not good. So could find success here for a dual threat. I don't really think those 4 touchdowns passing from a week ago on only 24 attempts are repeatable. Granted, he did come into the game late, so that's one way of thinking about it. The other way of thinking about it is they do have a very creative offensive staff, and they are playing a defense that does not have its shit together currently. 7.5, I think tournaments only is the way you could think about that one. Looking at them running the ball, they should have success running the ball here. They did have success running the ball last week. I was very upset as someone who owned some Devin Neal shares because Highshaw's out. The two were splitting the workload, and Highshaw's out. Devin Neal got the second half carries, but just couldn't get in the end zone. Somehow Jason Bean's going to throw 4 touchdowns before Devin Neal gets in the end zone. So that was frustrating, but he could have a blow-up game here, of course, with such a high over-under against a team like Oklahoma that you never really know what you're going to get. The issue is he's going to split the workload because they kept trying to get Kai Thomas on the field. He kept fumbling the ball. They kept getting him on the field. He did not look good. Sevian Morrison looked very explosive at 4K, so they should get him on the field more. Touched the ball twice. One of them went for 40 yards. I'm not really sure why he's not seeing more work, the Nebraska transfer. All that being said, again, Devin Neal, I think could be a high leverage tournament play. It's hard for me to get there last week after him burning me. So that means, of course, this week he's probably going for 30, but I wish he caught passes. Otherwise, I would really recommend him. I think it's a very good price overall. Kansas wide receivers. I don't play Kansas wide receivers. They just don't target them enough, even though they've been playing pretty well. This guy, Quinton Skinner, did catch 2 touchdowns last week, but did he? Because I don't think either one of those was a touchdown, but they gave it to him somehow after review. Clearly they want to get this kid the ball. He's big and I guess he's athletic, but he's 3.4K. So if you think Oklahoma's going to bust some coverages, then you could get there. Overall, looking at the Oklahoma side of things, I think Oklahoma could be interesting this week because 1, Kansas's defense is no good. 2, they're prone to getting in shootouts. 3, Dylan Gabriel's back. 4, you would think this is a rebound spot. They're not going to be held to 0 points every week. Sounds like if Dylan Gabriel's back, you're not going to get held to 0 points. That's for damn sure. So I actually think Oklahoma could be interesting. The issue is DraftKings absolutely insists on pricing Oklahoma to the moon, even though they kind of stink, right? So that's unfortunate. So other than that, I'm going to make the case for them anyway. Kansas ranks outside the top 100 in a number of metrics, including PPA, standard downs PPA, and success rate. And then their defensive line ranks outside the top 100 in havoc, line yards, and stuff rate. They are 3rd worst in the country in stuff rate. So if you're looking at Oklahoma's running backs, I suppose that's something you could do here with Eric Gray. He's a decent player. He's not one of the best Oklahoma running backs we've ever seen. And you can see there his workload just hasn't been great. They've also been blown out in 2 straight games. And Kansas State has a pretty good defense, and he still put up 114 yards. So you can make the case for Eric Gray. The issue is obviously his price is pretty insane. Javante Barnes, the freshman's been getting on the field a little bit more. Had 7 carries a week ago against Texas. Again, that game was a blowout, so I don't know how much we could read into that. And the TCU game was a blowout as well when he had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. So this kid's going to be a stud one day, I think. 4.1K is a good price. could be a good matchup against Kansas if you're looking for a cheap running back. Other than that, Gabriel, he's priced to the moon. I've kind of mentioned a few times this year that he doesn't run the ball as much as I would like to, and he's been running the ball a lot this year. So whether or not he's going to do that coming off that pretty nasty concussion, and then, of course, the collarbone injury last year is anyone's guess. But you can see there in the game logs right there, Jeff Lebby likes to run his quarterbacks. The offensive coordinator have a pretty long history of that, have a pretty profitable history of that as well. So I just think the price is to the moon. Most people who are in the 9K range are probably going to be playing Bryce Young if he is healthy. So other than that, Marvin Mims has just been a joke of a price all year. I kind of made fun of him for about 2 years in a row now with that terrible pricing. But I am going to make the case for him this week. So first off, let me make the case. Here's the game logs Kansas has allowed to opposing wide receiver ones. Quentin Johnson last week for TCU, 14 catches, 201 yards, 1 touchdown, game-winning touchdown. Xavier Hutchinson, Iowa State, 13 receptions for 100 yards. Bryce Ford Wheaton, West Virginia, 11 catches, 152 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's pretty great. They did hold Tank Dell down, but Houston's pretty weird. And Dana Holgorsen has no idea what they're doing offensively, and they kind of wait until they're down 2 scores before they actually start playing football. So I'm not sure. Duke did throw for 300 yards against this defense as well. And even in a low-scoring Iowa State game, they still allowed 287 passing yards. So I think the way to attack this team is probably, even though their defensive line isn't great, I still think the way to attack them is probably via the air. And Mims, I mean, there's some pretty cheap prices. Like the quarterbacks are pretty cheap this week. You can get some running back plays that are decent prices. There's some decent prices. So if you want to pay up to Mims, I wouldn't think anyone would do it. I feel like everyone plays Oklahoma every week anyway, but with such an ugly 49-0 game on everyone's mind and one of the most watched football games right this year, I think Mims could be a good play in tournaments. Of course, he's a wild card. I've talked bad about this guy for a while. It's not him as a player. He's great. He's always been efficient on a per snap basis. It's just that he doesn't get the targets that you would need for an 8,000 wide receiver, not even close to it. He only has 37 targets in 6 games. Meanwhile, Jalil Farouk at 5.7K could be a tournament guy only. He's second with 24 targets, and I think he's a pretty explosive player. But you can see there the production just really hasn't been there. So you would really need this game to turn into a shootout. Pause, take a breath. Okay. Iowa State, Texas, 16.5-point favorite. Feels a little wide, but Texas has just been absolutely balling out. You see a lot of power rankings have them as the number 4 team in the country. I can't say I disagree with it. Their defensive numbers have been pretty dang good, and now Quinn Ewers is back at quarterback, great running back, great wide receivers, star tight end. Even the offensive line is playing better than we thought. I don't see what's not to like with Texas, to be perfectly honest with you. All right. Iowa State, on their side of things, the offense just really hasn't been good. I think it's fairly simple at this point. Of course, this is a letdown spot for Texas, but we'll see if that matters. They are at home. Iowa State's 109th in explosiveness. They just aren't explosive whatsoever. 81st in success rates. They don't even move the chains. The rushing game has been terrible, so I'm not even really considering these running backs. 123rd in rush rate, so they're not running the ball. When they do, they're 105th in PPA, 93rd in success rate, 118th in rushing explosiveness. Just not good numbers whatsoever. Texas has been great against the rush. They're ranked 13th in rushing success rate. So no, thank you. As far as Hunter Deckers at quarterback, he is extremely cheap at 5.1K. They have been throwing the ball a lot, and he is a pretty big lumbering lefty who could stumble into a touchdown or two. So you see there in the game logs, right, in the last 5 weeks, he's been throwing the ball 36 times, 36 times, 38 times, 38 times, 48 times. So in a game that they're 16.5-point underdogs, I don't really see why that would be any different. You could definitely make a case for paying down for Deckers. I'm not really sure what his upside is, like if it's crazy, but there's definitely crazier things you can do than Deckers. As far as the wide receivers, it's pretty much Xavier Hutchinson only. His 87 targets this year are more than double of Xavier Worthy on the other side of this game. And Worthy's one of the best receivers in college football. So he's been an absolute target hog, and he's been very good. He's been this entire offense. I don't love the matchup, but if they're playing from behind, he could just get peppered with targets. He could see 20 targets in this game. Of course, he's priced to the moon, so I'm not really sure what you do with that. But if you want to play him in cash, I don't hate that. Okay, other than that, Jalen Knowles been their secondary wide receiver at 4.6K. He just catches a lot of short passes and isn't overly exciting. He's a good young player, but not explosive enough for me to love that against a Texas defense that's been playing very well. 21st in success rate on the year. All right, on the Texas side of things, I'm not really sure what's up with this pricing. They price Bijan to the moon and everybody else like they are crap. So I guess DraftKings likes some Bijan Robinson for Heisman tickets or something. Of course, Bijan is fine. I mean, he's been a lock for 20 fantasy points every single game. It is a tough matchup against Iowa State. At this point, I mean, Bijan put up 20 points against Alabama, so I guess we can kind of call him matchup proof, most likely. But it's definitely not a great matchup. Iowa State ranks 12th in rushing explosiveness against and 23rd in rushing PPA. So they're pretty darn good. They most recently held down Deuce Vaughn last week in Kansas State in a very ugly game in which Kansas State, I think they scored on their first drive of the game on a deep pass play with a broken tackle. And then there were no more touchdowns in that game, I believe. So it's pretty good defense, but it's not like they're absolutely elite or anything. I'm not playing Bijan in tournaments, but I think he could be an okay play in cash. Other than that, Quinn Ewers is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country. Whether or not he's one of the best, I think we still have to see. I saw a lot of people making some very strong statements after he tore apart an Oklahoma defense that's just been getting torn apart by everybody. So I thought there were some overreactions there. I'm still in wait and see mode with Quinn Ewers. I'm still overly positive on him and the offense as a whole, and he's 5.7K. So I'm not really sure he has a blow-up week, but I think you're expecting at least 20 fantasy points out of Quinn Ewers, right? And he's priced all the way down there. So definitely not a bad play on Quinn Ewers at all this week, especially if you want to stack him. He has some very cheap options. Of course, the top stacking options, Xavier Worthy. The issue is I've been playing a lot of Xavier Worthy, and he was fantastic for me against West Virginia, almost had 40 fantasy points. And then last week, it was the most frustrating thing in the world. He almost scored on the first drive of the game. Then he finally did score. Then they stopped throwing the ball to him, and then he almost got another touchdown. So I thought he should have had 3 touchdowns, and instead he ends up with only 12 fantasy points. Not a lot of targets, only 3 receptions. It was very disappointing against an Oklahoma defense, that's for sure. Very disappointing. I think you can go to either of these guys. You can always play Xavier Worthy. He's extremely explosive. He's extremely fast. He has a cheap quarterback to stack him with. I don't hate it. Of course, the usage isn't what I'd like to see. Jatavian Sanders has basically taken over as the target leader for this team, even though it is close still with him and Worthy. Has 5 receptions in 3 straight games, has 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games. Can we expect him to score 2 touchdowns here? I'm not really sure, but he's 3.7K. He's been getting decent targets, has a good quarterback, plays for a good offense. I think Sanders is a very good play in all formats at 3.7K. I was listening to some beat writers on Iowa State who seem to think that Sanders could be a way they choose to attack their unique 3-3-5 defense. I'm not really sure about all that. That's something I'll be watching closely in this game for future reference, but that kid's a stud. I think he's going to get drafted pretty high in the NFL. If he keeps this up, he's going to be in for a very, very productive season. The other Texas receivers, not for me. Not for me. They don't target them enough. All right, Minnesota versus Illinois. Not much fantasy love going to be going on for this one when the over-under is at 39.5. Can't even crack 40. Feel like I'm talking about the Thursday night game. Don't even know who's playing the NFL. Somebody let me know. But feel like I'm talking about that game instead of this one. Okay, Minnesota's 6.5-point favorites. They were, of course, playing some pretty great football until they ran into the juggernaut that is Purdue. I like that Purdue team. They're just finding a way to win games. I like that. Tanner Morgan, your quarterback's 4.9K. That's the first thing I have to point out. I think you just probably pay up and go to either Deckers or pay up. I think you either go to Deckers or Ewers if you're paying down. On the other hand, he's 4.9K, and this passing offense isn't bad, but his best wide receiver, Chris Ottman-Bell, is out for the year with injury, so that's obviously not great. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Tanner Morgan because that's a joke. Mohamed Ibrahim was mysteriously absent from their last game, but it sounds like he's going to be good to go for this one. You're playing an Illinois defense that ranks number 1 in the nation in rushing success rate. So I'm not really sure you're going to get there with Ibrahim. I'm not personally, but the volume is absolutely 100% elite. I would be concerned about him coming off an injury and stuff. Tough matchup. Illinois' defense has been great overall. They're 2nd overall in success rate, 2nd in PPA. It's been pretty lights out. It's been impressive to watch. Other than that, I'm not really sure why you consider secondary plays in a game with this over-under. Illinois, it's Chase Brown or Chase Brown only. He's 7.2K. That does seem too cheap. Is it a good matchup? No, it's not. Minnesota's defense is great. They rank 3rd in success rate against, 8th in PPA. That's a very good defense. The issue, they're better in the secondary. 1st in passing success rate against. 1st in the entire nation. That rush defense, let's dive in because Chase Brown has elite usage, okay? Elite usage. in any matchup. It's a home game. It's a big game for them. I think he might lead the entire nation at 879 yards. Somebody fact check me on that one. But I know Kalon Laybourne was 4th in the country last night with 700 something yards. So Chase Brown's been elite. That's a simple way to put it. It's elite usage. He's always a threat to get 30 carries, and he is used a little bit in the passing game. So Minnesota's rush defense. Let's dive in. They rank 42nd in rushing PPA, 22nd in success rate. So that's okay. It's not quite the secondaries, but still pretty good. And then 50th in rushing explosiveness. So they're all right. PFF doesn't really love them. They're 58th in DFF's rushing defense grade. So overall, I think Illinois should move the ball on the ground. Chase Brown, 7.2K. I think he's a decent cash play. Like if this kid can put up 146 yards on Iowa, still get 4 receptions, still get there, I think he's a decent cash play in tournaments. Not really sure I'm getting there personally, but he's Chase Brown, elite usage. All right, Penn State versus Michigan. This is going to be a fun one to watch. I will probably try to watch every minute of this one. Do I have much interest in DFS? No. Do I have any interest in betting? Probably not. I might bet Penn State, but probably not. Penn State's a 7-point underdog in the big house. Over-under's at 50.5. Don't really have a lean on the under. So Penn State, they laid a dud in their last game against Northwestern. 17-7 win over Northwestern. Not very good. 360 total yards. They only averaged 4-point-something yards per play. They were in the 4s. That's not going to cut it. Not going to cut it whatsoever. The next week, so I think Penn State was on a bye last week, but when Northwestern played their game after that, they were absolutely crushed by Graham Mertz and Shamari DK. I think is how you say that kid's name. He went absolutely bazooka, bonkers, crazy. Never see Wisconsin's passing offense go crazy. So that means Northwestern's defense stinks, and that means that Penn State couldn't take advantage of them. I still think Penn State has an explosive offense at times. They just have a lot of young pieces, some new pieces. They're still figuring it out. And their quarterback, Sean Clifford, who is okay for a college quarterback, but just simply not really the most reliable player. That's for darn sure. As far as Michigan's defense goes, they're really good. They're going to grade out as like top 5 in all the PFF metrics, of course. They're number 3 in PPA, 12th in success rate overall, 17th in explosiveness. I hesitate to say they're that good, to be frank. I think they're a good defense, but I hesitate to say they're in the great category. They played one competent offense all year by my standards. One I would consider competent because they've played some cupcakes, man, like Colorado State, Hawaii. Like we're talking cupcakes, all the frosting. They played one. That was Maryland. Maryland put up 397 yards of offense in the big house. Maryland's pretty good, but the book on them is when they play a good defense, they just totally shut down, right? Tua's brother, he just shuts down. But they didn't shut down. They hung somewhat close in that game. So can Penn State hang in this game? I think they can. Does that make them interesting in DFS? Not really. The pricing is very accurate. I think they priced this team extremely accurately. So much so that I don't really think I'm going to cover any of these players, to be honest with you. In the running back room, it's the 2 freshmen, right? Katrin Allen and Nick Singleton. Katrin Allen did have 21 carries a week ago. Or sorry, last game. I guess that was 2 weeks ago. They had the bye week. Nick Singleton, I think, is probably the better player. Also had 21 carries. They're going to eat into each other's workload. And in a game that they're probably going to need to throw the ball a little bit too. I can't really recommend either of these guys, although that price on Allen is intriguing. And then Singleton's one of the most explosive players in college football. So he can always get you there in any game. I remember, I don't know if people are going to call this comparison crazy. It probably is for a freshman. I probably shouldn't do it to him, but I'm going to do it anyway because who gives a shit? Michigan State versus Michigan last year. I'm saying terrible matchup for Kenneth Walker. Terrible matchup against Michigan. And then what does he do, right? It looks like they're playing from behind. It looks like, okay, yeah, Kenneth Walker, he's not going to get you there. And then he breaks off a bunch of long runs because he's an explosive player, and great players do great things on the big stage. So Nick Singleton can always do that. I won't talk you off him, but in tournaments, but not for me. All right, looking at the Michigan side of things. How about this for Michigan's offense? They move the chains, and they are not explosive whatsoever. So how about this? They are 5th in success rate. That's really good. 5th in success rate. Explosiveness, 127th. They're the complete opposite. They're the 5th worst. So that tells you about all you need to know, right? All you need to know. JJ McCarthy, their quarterback, he's been completing like 75% of his passes because they're not explosive whatsoever. They rank 127th in passing explosiveness. The offensive line that's supposed to be so great has not been performing up to standards. They rank 103rd in line yards, 97th on stuff rate. It's not going to get the job done. I think they're better than that personally, but Penn State's defense has been pretty good. They've only allowed one team all year to rush for over 100 yards. And that was on 36 carries when it was Auburn. So that's only a 3.3 yards per carry. In case you don't have your calculators out, that's not very good. What does that tell me? Not really interested in Michigan this week. I keep wanting to play Donovan Edwards. I even played a little bit of him last week. It felt really stupid. Why? Because they're feeding Blake Corum carries. Obviously feeding him at 7.8K. This is another running back priced in the 7K range that has elite usage. My issue is that they, again, just haven't been very explosive. He's 8th in success rate as a team. Michigan is. They're 8th in success rate, 89th in rushing explosiveness. So that's not really going to be enough for me to get there in tournaments. I don't play their wide receivers. I think this would be a nice matchup if they might need a few explosive plays, and I think Ronnie Bell's a very good player. At 6K, if you want to do something pretty unconventional, you could play Ronnie Bell in tournaments for sure. But not very interesting to me. All right, moving along. Two teams that have been dreadful to watch. Miami, -7 in Blacksburg against Virginia Tech. Over-under is only 46.5. Overall, I don't think we should be terribly interested in this game. Miami, Tyler Van Dyke. I mean, he's 5K. That's so cheap for a guy who, one, threw the ball 57 times a year ago, and two, a few short months ago, I thought this guy was going to be eventually drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. He went on an absolute heater to end the season last year, had 6 straight games with at least 300 yards passing and 3 touchdown passes. And now look at him. What do they do to my boy? He's 5K. Virginia Tech's not very good. That's just the plain truth. They're not very good. They're playing at home where things can happen in Blacksburg, right? But it isn't. Let's see. It's a 12:30 kickoff, so I don't know. That stadium's usually tougher to play in at night, in my opinion. Very fun atmosphere. Go there sometime. But they're pretty good against the pass. They rank 10th in success rate against the pass, so that's not going to be too interesting for me. Xavier Estrepo was a wide receiver I was interested in this year. Had a very good start to the year. Him and Van Dyke have like a very cute relationship. They really like each other. There's a long story about him on ESPN. And they clearly had a very good connection, but now he's hurt. Not coming back until the end of the year, if at all. So the wide receiver room has been an absolute mess. It is not up to standards whatsoever, not up to Power 5 level. We saw a shift last week in the snap, so let's talk about that. Frank Ladson at 3.9K, he's a Clemson transfer. He saw a full-time role last week. He had 8 targets. And then Brashard Smith also started seeing a full-time role. So let me search Smith. Let's see what his price is here. He's stone cold minimum, and he played a full-time role last week, caught 5 passes for 59 yards. I think you can play Brashard Smith. There's not a ton of 3K guys I like this week. There have been a lot so far this year. I've been playing one pretty much every week. This week, I'm not sure I'm going to. If I do, I think Smith is sticking out as the most interesting one for me. Of course, we don't know if that snap rate is going to be sticky from week to week, but with what we have on the background of the wide receivers, with them already being pretty bad, it makes sense for them to open up the competition, right? And especially with Estrepo being out, I think it all makes sense. I think I would not be surprised if he plays a full-time role again this week as a min-price guy with a potential NFL quarterback. You see where I'm getting, right? But I kind of buried the lead here. I think the most interesting thing in this game is monitoring Miami's rushing attack. Why, you ask? Miami's rushing attack, what have they done recently? It's not what they have done. It's what they possibly could do against a Virginia Tech rushing defense that gave up over 320 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground to one single player. Abanikanda for Pitt. Izzy Abanikanda. He rushed for 320 yards and 6 touchdowns. It's not a typo. It's not an error. Yes, against this Virginia Tech defense. Now, that seemed kind of out of nowhere. One, because Abanikanda was on the sideline in a sling the week before, knocked out with an injury. And two, because Virginia Tech's defense hasn't been terrible against the rush this year before that game. Even after that game, PFF still ranks them as 52nd in rushing defense and 20th in tackling. Top 20 in tackling. How did you give up that many yards and 6 touchdowns? Yeah, I'm not sure about PFF's numbers sometimes, but still, it's not like they're god-awful. They rank 84th in rushing PPA overall, 54th in success rate. Those numbers are bad, but they're not too bad. The issue is they are 115th in rushing explosiveness against. So when you're going against a guy in Henry Parrish who's kind of sees this backfield from Rooster Knighton, who's been injured, came back, then re-injured his ankle in the Middle Tennessee State game, and then coughed up 2 fumbles in the last 2 games, lost both of them. I think Parrish could see a pretty good workload. He's already been seeing a decent workload. He actually led the team with 10 targets a week ago. Parrish is looking mighty interesting at 4.8K. I know it's ugly to play a Miami running back, especially one that can only muster 19 rushing yards against an absolutely terrible North Carolina defense. It's certainly not the most reliable thing in the world, but how can you not after seeing what Virginia Tech's defense did a week ago? I will note Virginia Tech's defense should see a boost. Alan Tisdale, their will linebacker, and I do watch some Hokie football, so he is actually an impact player. He's a good player for sure. He's expected to play in this one. He was dealing with academic, or not, I don't know if they said it was academic, but it was eligibility issues. So it's not like it was an injury thing, and he's been practicing. So that will be a big boost overall. But I think Henry Parrish is mighty interesting in cash and tournaments. All right. So Virginia Tech's offense isn't good, and I'm not going to talk about them because I'm not really sure why I would. They rank outside the top 100 in both success rate and explosiveness. They've been absolutely god-awful rushing the ball, 123rd in rushing PPA. They're now going to split carries between 2 guys because Malachi Thomas finally came back last week against Pitt, and he's a pretty good player. He had a good game. He had 5 receptions and 84 yards on the ground. So I guess at 6K, if you're thinking, I don't know what you're thinking, he's playing at home, and I don't know, but Miami's defense, they really have some impact defensive linemen. I actually enjoy watching their defensive linemen. Leonard Taylor, he's missed 4 tackles this year and still grades out close to a 90 on PFF. So that kid's clearly a stud. And they rank 3rd in rushing PPA on the season. So I'm definitely not getting there. And I think Thomas and Keshawn King are going to split carries. I do think Thomas is the better player. Now that he's healthy, they are going to feature him a little bit more, but it's not like I can forecast 20 carries or something. 1, because that team's really terrible. And 2, because that's a program that's always divvied up carries. All right. Bama versus Tennessee. I'm sure everyone already knows the betting line on this one, but it is a Bama -7. There's -7.5 in some spots on the road in Knoxville. Playing Tennessee. Over-unders at 65.5. I guess the big news in this one is Bryce Young. Okay, he missed last week's game. After leaving with a shoulder injury before that against Texas. No, it was against Arkansas. So he got injured against Arkansas and then missed last week's game against Texas A&M. I think he's a true game time decision. I think he's really day-to-day. I've heard conflicting things from multiple sources. I've been really trying to keep my ear tuned to the streets on this one. The Tennessee insiders seem convinced Bryce Young is playing. Alabama insiders, of course, wouldn't tip their card, so they're saying, I'm not sure. Nick Saban did say Bryce Young would not have played last week if he was healthy. Of course, Nick Saban can say whatever he wants, and of course, he's going to say whatever he wants in this huge game against 2 top 10 teams on the road in Tennessee on the 3rd Saturday in October. So I don't know if Bryce Young plays. Do I think Bryce Young plays? Yeah, I do. When he first went down with injury, we have to go back a little bit, right? Nick Saban said, "Oh, it's something that happens sometimes with Bryce Young, right? Something along those lines of basically like it's happened before, like it's a shoulder thing that happens with Bryce, which doesn't sound good, but also sounds like it's not like it's anything totally out of the ordinary or that would keep him sidelined for long. But overall, I think he's a true game time decision, and I think he's going to play. And I think he has more upside than any quarterback on the slate. I think Tennessee's secondary is a joke. I think they're terrible. I think their linebackers are some of the worst I've ever seen at this high of a top 10 team. They're some of the worst I've ever seen at that level. And their safeties are terrible. One of them just got arrested, but he's going to play. Their safeties, just watch the angles these guys take. There's going to be a few plays where the angles they take are just ridiculous. It's been happening for a while. It's been happening this season as well. The secondary is bad. They're going to hit him for some big plays. Of course, he's 9.5K. I think I'm going to get there a little bit in tournaments. Maybe some people are going to be scared off by the injury, and maybe they should be. But I think it could just be a potential leverage spot, which you're never going to get with Bryce Young, really. But I think that's fine. I think arguably the most interesting player on this Alabama team this week is Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back. This kid has been an absolute star. The workload was questionable to start the year, right? He's getting 4 carries against ULM. What's going on there? What ULM sucks is the thing. And you say, okay, well, they only got 9 carries against Texas. What was happening there? Well, they were trailing for big parts of that game, and he still had 9 receptions for 74 yards in that one and a touchdown, is what I will say. Alabama's rushing attack has been really good this year. I will say they rank 18th in rushing PPA. They just haven't been running the ball that much. And they rank 4th in rushing explosiveness. So get this, 4th in rushing explosiveness. Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the most explosive players in the entire country. Correct. They're going against a Tennessee defense that, while they're very good on the defensive line, that's their strength defensively. They have a genuinely pretty good defensive line. They rank 3rd in success rate against the rush. Tennessee does. Explosiveness, 125th. In rushing explosiveness. That's a key stat for me on the slate. 125th in rushing explosiveness. Playing a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, who could get some catches out of the backfield as well and burn those linebackers and safeties. I think Gibbs is a very, very fine option in tournaments and cash this week. Looking at Alabama's rushing attack, they are averaging 257 rushing yards per game. In the last 2 weeks, they ran for 317 yards and 5 touchdowns against Arkansas. Big number, folks. And they also put up 286 yards on Texas A&M. So, yeah. And then people remember the Texas game where it didn't seem like they got much going offensively, but they still averaged 6.7 yards per carry in that game. So, overall, I think the offensive line is better run blocking than they are pass blocking as well. If you're going to ask, hey, if Bryce Young misses this game, are you going to play Jalen Milroe? I don't really think so. He runs the ball a ton, so he has elite rushing upside. The issue is at 8.8K. I'm not really sure he's great as a passer, and I don't really think you would stack him. This sounds weird to say, but I'm not even really looking at the Alabama wide receivers this year. I think Trayshawn Holden's been the most consistent, but he's 7.2K and has had trouble in cracking 1 fantasy point dating back to last week, especially if Milroe plays. That's no good. Jermaine Burton, he just hasn't gotten there. I'm a big Burton fan. It's just not there. The Georgia transfer, it just hasn't done anything. At this point in the season, we're at week 7. I'm going to need to see it before I believe it. Ja'Cory Brooks had a blowout game, right? A blow-up game against Vandy. That's Vandy, and then did nothing. So I can't really trust Ja'Cory Brooks, while I do think he's still in line for a pretty big year. Eventually down the road, I think they're going to need him, right? He's going to be in for some big games, but I can't trust it. They've been rotating a lot of these guys in. Kobe Prentice seemed like they were trying to get him the ball early last week, and then what's he end up with, right? 2 catches. Seemed like they're trying to get him the ball against Arkansas early when Bryce Young was playing. They were actually targeting Kobe Prentice down the field, which was nice to see for a team that just hasn't really been the passing explosiveness just hasn't really been there at points this year. It was there against a bad Arkansas secondary, granted, but they were targeting Kobe Prentice down the field a few times early in the first quarter. So if Bryce Young does play, I guess he can get there, but he's priced up at 6K and he's hardly done anything this year. So not overly interesting to me, which sounds crazy again. All right. Looking at Tennessee. Looking at Tennessee, I mean, it's Tennessee. By now, you know, it's Josh Heupel's offense. Hendon Hooker is going to be the star. He's a genuine Heisman candidate. He's like 25 years old or something. So, and he runs the ball a lot. My issue with him, so I think he's fine at 7.7K, obviously at home with an over-under like this. My issue is his star wide receiver, Cedric Tillman, has been out. I've been hearing from Tennessee insiders that they think Cedric Tillman has a genuine chance to play this week. It's not a for sure thing by any means, but they think he might try to give it a go this week, which is a surprise because his initial timeline was probably going to be out a few weeks. They said his next opportunity to return would be October 15th against Alabama, but he's expected to miss another 1 and 2 weeks. So that was the expectation, but I'm hearing he might try to give it a go. If he does give it a go, you're getting a tremendous bargain on a guy who's 6.5K. On the other hand, he's probably playing injured, right? It doesn't sound like he's going to be full strength, but that's a little interesting. If he does not play, I think everyone's going to go to Brew McCoy because he's had over 24 fantasy points in back-to-back games. And I think that's fine because he's kind of fulfilling that big outside wide receiver role. That's been really great in a Heupel offense. He's been kind of slotting right in there at the X in the absence of Cedric Tillman. So I think he's interesting, and I think a lot of people are going to get there. I actually think Jalen Hyatt's probably a better play. Of course, he's priced higher at 6.9K, but price isn't overly prohibitive. I just think Hyatt's the more explosive player, and if you're going to be Alabama, I think it's going to be on explosive plays, personally. But that's probably a controversial take. I think they're both fine if Tillman is out. If they both play, I'm not going to get there. Ramel Keaton's been the 3rd wide receiver in the offense. They did target him a little bit last week, but we saw it got nowhere, so I would not be interested there. I'm not going to target Tennessee's running backs, which I know is weird to say because, again, they like to set up the run to set up the pass, really. Establish the run to set up the pass is really what Tennessee tries to do, which might sound weird in a Josh Heupel spread attack, but that's actually what Tennessee does if you watch the games. However, Alabama's defensive line is pretty darn good. Will Anderson, ever heard of him? They got a bunch of stars there. They rank 7th in line yards, 3rd in stuff rate, 7th in rushing PPA, 6th overall in PPA, so I'm not getting there this week with the running backs. All right, Arkansas, BYU. I don't think either of these teams has been very good lately, especially Arkansas. They've kind of fallen off a cliff, to be honest with you. Kind of falling off a cliff. All right, so Arkansas, I think in this one's interesting because their price is pretty low and they have a very good rushing attack. Okay. Very good rushing attack. And you're playing a BYU team that doesn't have a very good defense. Now, it is in Provo, and that's really weird because, of course, Arkansas is not going to be playing in Provo very often. It is a difficult place to play. That does sketch me out a little bit, and Arkansas has been on a pretty bad skid. On the other hand, you can think of it like this BYU team just isn't as good as people thought they were. This is a team that returned 21 starters, is supposed to have a star quarterback, has some studs in the wide receiver room, and returned every starter defensively. So it seems like everything was lining up for BYU, and it just hasn't. I know they've had a tough schedule, an underratedly difficult schedule, but they don't look very good to me, to be quite honest. So KJ Jefferson missed last week. Sounds like he's been cleared to have a full normal practice week, and that makes KJ Jefferson interesting in all formats. Why? KJ Jefferson is a very large human. KJ Jefferson is an elite rushing quarterback, and that makes you always have to be interested. 6.4K is way too cheap for KJ Jefferson. BYU's defense is not very good, allowing about 170 rushing yards per game. They all are vulnerable. And KJ Jefferson has had at least 32 fantasy points in 3 of the 4 games he's played a full snap count. Of course, the Alabama game, he didn't play very well. That's Alabama. BYU is not Alabama. I think Jefferson's fine in all formats. Raheem Sanders is also fine in all formats. He's 6.5K. He's getting an elite usage rate, and he also catches passes out of the backfield. I also think he's an elite talent. I think this kid's going to be in the NFL. I really like me some Rocket Sanders. So I think he's fine in all formats again. As far as wide receivers go for Arkansas, I just can't get there. I think Landers is an explosive player at 4.4K, but very inconsistent. I think you target one of KJ or Rocket if you're going to Arkansas this week. As far as BYU goes, Arkansas's defense has been dreadful, ranking in the bottom 10th in pretty much every metric you look at here for their secondary. In particular, it's gotten so bad that they're working out 2 freshman wide receivers, including a really good one in Quincy McAdoo. They're working them out at cornerback this week. So that tells me they're in dire spots, very dire spots. I can't play Jaren Hall at 8.1K because his price is too high, but he is at home playing a bad defense. I could see you getting there in tournaments. This is a team that just likes to run the ball a decent amount. So if you're not going to be super efficient passing the ball, you're not going to get there. Can you be efficient against Arkansas? Yeah, but it just seems like a narrow window for sure. All right, as far as the wide receivers go, they've been banged up all year. Puka Nacua came back last week, but he only had 3 targets. Didn't look like himself. He had 1 rushing attempt, right? He didn't catch any of his 3 targets against Notre Dame. Did not look healthy. It's a great price on Puka against a bad defense. So I could consider getting there in tournaments, but at this point, I'm really questioning if he's healthy or not. Gunnar Romney at 5.5K. He also hasn't been healthy all year. Was dealing with a kidney issue. Finally came back, played 1 game, and then last week he left with another injury. I don't think they said it was related to his kidney situation. He's not practicing this week. They said they're hopeful he's going to go this week, but I've seen the song and dance with Gunnar Romney for what feels like 3 years in a row now. Right? Where he's constantly week to week, and it's not something I love for sure. Keanu Hill's kind of been like the 3rd guy, no matter who's at wide receiver. He's just kind of been the 3rd guy. He's had 1 good game, and that's it. It was a blow up against Wyoming with 36 points. Could this be a blow up spot against Arkansas? Of course it could be. I think where my ownership really is going to be interested in, and yeah, Chase Roberts, I love him too, but he's out again. So just a lot of injuries BYU's been dealing with. If they finally get healthy at some point, they could really put it together, but it's just questionable if that's going to happen, really. I think my interest is in Cody Epps, the wide receiver at 4.1K. He has a touchdown in 4 straight games. This guy's the all-time receiving touchdowns leader in modern day history. Modern day. It's a good program, fellas. Cody Epps, all-time leader. He's a good player, and he got 2 touchdowns against a good Notre Dame defense a week ago. I've been kind of pounding the table for him to see the field more. And a lot of these performances where he paid off, he wasn't even seeing a full workload. So if Gunnar Romney's out, I think Cody Epps is probably the smash play of the week for me at 4.1K. I know it's hard to trust a BYU receiver when 1, they don't have a trustworthy pass rate, and 2, There's so many health concerns. Like, we don't really know what the snap share is going to look like, right? But I think he's a very, very, very fine tournament play. And if Gunnar Romney's out, I think he can play Epps and cash as well. All right, so moving on. Oklahoma State, one of the games of the week here. TCU is favored by 4 points, over under 68.5. So this is the one everybody's going to be playing in DFS. I can't really fault it. Okay, I can't really fault it because it probably goes over, to be honest with you. These are two top 5 offenses in scoring. They actually average the exact same points per game. They're actually tied with each other. I think it's 46.4. Fact check me on it. But should see some points. Okay, the news with Oklahoma State, Braden Johnson, their leading receiver, did not play last week. His status is uncertain for this game. In his absence, the leading target getter was Bryson Green with 9, and then Jalen Bray, who finally saw the field, had 8. Green played 51 snaps, and Bray played 41. So those are the 2 big outside receiver targets that usually are successful in this Gundy scheme. I like Bryson Green. I feel like people aren't talking about this kid enough. He has 4 touchdowns this year. He's been solid. He played as a true freshman last year. I think he was a true freshman. As a freshman last year and was successful, and he's been successful again. He made a few catches in that Texas Tech game that were just, those were grown man catches. I like him at 4.5K. Of course, it's kind of difficult when we don't have any news on Braden Johnson, right? So it was a concussion. And again, who knows if that's 1 week? Who knows if he didn't clear a protocol and is back? Who knows if he's still experiencing side effects? It's very difficult to tell. We don't really have the news. Other than that, Jaden Bray, I think, could be a tournament play at 4.9K. He was a very impressive as a freshman and came back and again saw 8 targets a week ago. So I think the fact that he didn't do anything with those targets will, 1, keep people from playing him in tournaments, which could give you some leverage. But 2, it's also concerning to me that he didn't do anything with those targets against when the offense is scoring 41 points, right? And he's not doing anything. I think that is concerning, but it was the first time he saw the field. And the coaches did mention going into that game that he was still like conditioning himself back up to full speed. So I didn't expect him to see a full snap workload, and he didn't at 41. It's quite possible that goes up, and then his targets even go up past 10 against a TCU defense that I really think is exploitable. I just don't think this TCU's defense is very good. They rank 122nd in explosiveness, 129th in passing explosiveness. So I really think you can target Spencer Sanders. I've been kind of flip-flopping all week on which defense I like more, Spencer Sanders or Max Duggan in this matchup. And I can't really come up with an answer. I like them both. I think a lot of people are going to stack them in tournaments and in cash. And I can't really hate either of them because they have an elite. There's an elite over-under. They've both been averaging over 30 points per game, and they both run the ball. So I don't hate it. I think Spencer Sanders is a little difficult to find stacking options, but his stacking options are also cheaper. So if you play him in tournaments, I think that would be the way to go if you're stacking. All right, Dom Richardson, running back. He has an elite workload, okay? This kid's been getting carries. When they're playing good teams, he's getting over 20 carries. TCU, I don't know why. PFF likes TCU. They rank him 7th in tackling, but the advanced numbers don't like him so much. And they've had a pretty pillow soft schedule, right? They've played like Colorado, Tarleton State, just not the most difficult. And they rank 80th in rushing PPA, 89th in success rate. So I think Richardson is going to be able to run the ball on him. I guess my issue here is that he's not explosive. Richardson's not explosive. And I think the explosive plays are probably going to come through the air this week. The workload's great. I think he's more of a cash play. I might play a little bit of Richardson in tournaments if I ought to go with him as a run back with Max Duggan. All right. Speaking of TCU, let's talk about that Oklahoma State defense. It's really regressed. Last year, it was absolutely amazing, right? Got them a Big 12 championship berth. And that was the calling card. This year, their defense is very vulnerable, especially in the secondary. They rank 118th in explosiveness overall. So you have 2 teams that are bottom 15 in explosiveness. I think you're going to see some big plays in this one. So Max Duggan is totally fine. He's playing in a Sonny Dykes system where he's going to throw the ball a decent amount. And Max Duggan's number 1 calling card, in my opinion, is always whether or not he's going to get the rushing touchdown. So if he gets the rushing touchdowns in this one, he probably gets there for you. If he doesn't get the rushing touchdowns, I don't think you have to play him. I think he's probably going to have a very, very, very high ownership. Again, I think he's a very good play. I'm not talking you off of him or anything, but I do have my concerns a little bit in that if he doesn't get there with the rushing touchdowns, and if he's only going to throw the ball, 33 times a game, that's a decent amount, but it's not like it's a lead or anything. So yeah. All right. In the wide receiver room, it all starts and stops with Quentin Johnson. This guy did nothing. Was on a milk carton until he absolutely exploded last week against Kansas. Saw a whopping 17 targets after having only 21 total in his first 4 games. So is it going to continue? I don't know. He's a star. He's probably a future first-round pick. I don't see why it wouldn't continue against a very vulnerable Oklahoma State secondary that ranks 101st in passing explosiveness and 97th in passing PPA. So I do like me some Quentin Johnson this week in tournaments. As far as the running back room, I think Oklahoma State is better against the rush. They're still not fantastic, but 52nd in rushing success rate. TCU has been fantastic rushing the ball, 4th in rushing PPA, 3rd in rushing explosiveness. And I do think Kendre Miller is a future NFL running back. My issue is he hasn't received over 20 carries all year long, and they haven't been throwing the ball to him as much as I think they probably should for that explosive of a player. Just give it to him on the screen, see if he takes it to the house. He might. At 6.2K, that's a good price. Don't hate it in tournaments, but nothing crazy for me. All right, NC State versus Syracuse. This is going to be a pretty good game, probably, except not a good one for DFS. I'm going to try to be quick on this one. 3.5 is the spread in favor of Syracuse. Over-unders at 42. Yikes. Devin Leary is doubtful for this game. Sounds like he could give it a go. If he does, he could grit it out. Like the coaches are talking about how tough he is, but it sounded like an injury they thought was going to take multiple weeks to heal from. So even if he does play, he's going to be banged up. If he doesn't, the backup's going to be Jack Chambers. He's an FCS transfer, and he actually didn't even complete a pass last week when he came into the game. He's primarily a rusher. But Syracuse's defense overall is pretty good, and they're really good at limiting explosive plays. I don't really think you have to look at anything in NC State, whether or not Devin Leary plays, to be perfectly honest with you. If he doesn't, it's quite possible they lean on the ground game more. And that does make me a little bit interested in these running backs against a Syracuse team that's vulnerabilities do rely on the rushing game. Syracuse ranks 107th in rushing success rate against. And while NC State is not good in run blocking, they can get there here if they're really relying on the ground game. Jordan Houston, 15 fantasy points last week, and he's only 4.7K, so it could be a fine in cash. But Demi Sumo, I think, is the better back, and it sounds like he's expected to play against Syracuse. So I guess I could see getting all the way down to Demi Sumo at 3.8K, but it's really not my favorite play whatsoever. All right, looking at the other side of things. I don't know. Like Syracuse hasn't really looked great since the opener against Louisville. They looked fantastic in that one, and they blew out UConn. But the only other big game they've played this year has been against Purdue, and they were significantly outgained in that one, and then somehow found a way to, a miraculous win at the buzzer. So I don't know how trustworthy Syracuse is here. Of course, they are playing at home, but I think NC State's defense is just flat out like really good. I like their defense. They rank 10th in success rate overall. They've been giving up too many explosive plays, so Syracuse could hit some big ones. But overall, I don't think I'm getting there on Syracuse this week. I could make a case for Garrett Schrader. He's only 6,000. He plays in a Robert Anae offense, which means they're going to run a lot of plays. And he is an elite rusher at the quarterback position. Is he an elite player? No. He's not a very good thrower, and he doesn't really have anyone you would want to stack him with, but I will just mention that. Okay. If you are looking at the wide receivers, Sean Tucker, the running back, and Oronde Gadsden, the second, are tied for the team lead with 27 targets. So I think Gadsden is the top receiving option, but at 5.9K, it is a tough matchup. All right, and then Sean Tucker, elite usage. You've all heard it before, elite usage in the 7K range. There's a number of guys I could say this about. He basically has to hit an explosive play to get you there. My thing with Tucker, dating back to last season, is he has these blow-up games. Then he has a lot of games where, he's fine, right? Like against Virginia, 21 carries, 60 yards. That's not very good, but he did have 5 receptions to kind of salvage, right, the day. But 14 fantasy points isn't going to get you there at 7.3K. He's not my favorite play. He did have the blow up against Louisville, but Louisville's not really as good of a team as we thought they were going to be this year. And NC State has a good defensive line and a very, very good linebacking core. So hard for me to recommend. All right, Maryland versus Indiana. Maryland, 11.5 point favorite. Over under 61.5. This is just your friendly reminder that Indiana beats Illinois in week 1. Friendly reminder for no reason. All right. Indiana, man, they just haven't looked good lately, though. They were outgained by 90 yards against Nebraska, and then outgained by 240 yards against Michigan last week. Michigan's good, but that score was closer than what the rest of the box score indicated. I think if you're interested in something here, it has to be the passing game for Maryland. Indiana has actually been pretty good against the rush. They ranked 17th in rushing PPA, 17th in rushing explosiveness. And then, of course, Maryland, we've seen this story before. They like to divvy up the carries. Roman Hembry, a very impressive freshman who does get a lot of targets. But if you're only going to get about 7 carries, I don't know. I guess you're 11.5-point favorite. Maybe Hembry gets some more usage, but they've been rotating Littleton in too much for my liking. Tagovailoa at 6.9K is interesting against an Indiana team that's been really bad in the secondary. They rank 120th in passing success rate, 120th. That's really bad, folks. 114th in passing PPA. The book on Tagovailoa for a long time has been that he plays well against terrible competition, and then he lays a dud against good competition. The passing game hasn't been as good as I think a lot of us would like so far this year, and they haven't been explosive, 85th in passing explosiveness, but they have some playmakers on the outside, and this is a very favorable matchup. I think at 6.9K, I think that's certainly viable, certainly viable, especially in tournaments. He's not the most trustworthy quarterback, but you could definitely get there. My issue is that it's really hard to find somebody to stack him with, and he is a pass-first quarterback. I think if you're going somewhere, it'd be Rakim Jarrett at 6.2K. My issue is, I mean, he's the team leader in targets in the last 2 weeks, but he only has 13. He hasn't really been a workhorse. PFF grades him out very poorly. And then Roman Hembry, the running back, is second on the team with 10 targets. So the secondary options, they've been kind of rotating in Copeland, Jones, and Demas. But Demas just isn't as good of a player as he used to be. And then the issue with all 3 of those guys is, 1, they're competing with Hembry at running back. And then 2, they're also competing with Corey Dyches, this absolutely amazing tight end, who I really like. He's kind of a hybrid. He's only 225 pounds. He had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns against Purdue last week, almost 30 fantasy points. So if you want to go with Dyches, I do think he's really good. I do think he's extremely viable. I do think he's extremely variable from week to week. He is also viable, but not extremely. Definitely variable. Okay. Looking at Indiana. Let's not look at Indiana. They stink. They rank outside the top 100 and too many metrics for me to list. Otherwise, this video is going to go over an hour. So I don't know why we do that. Maryland's defense is actually pretty good. 27th in PPA, 37th in explosiveness. They've actually been pretty good. So my one interest on Indiana would be the target hog, Cam Camper, who has been among the leaders in the country in target hogs. Issue is he got hurt, came back, and then only had 2 receptions against Michigan in a game they were down for large portions of that game. So he did still have 9 targets, so that's interesting. 5.8K is a cheap price in a game they should be trailing. Maryland's not exactly a trustworthy team. Indiana is playing at home. I could certainly see you getting there to Cam Camper and in cash as well. But I'm not going to lie and tell you I know for a fact he's 100% healthy. And Maryland's defense has been better against the pass, 26th in the PPA, 17th in passing explosiveness. All right, this is one of the more interesting games on the slate, this next one, Ohio versus Western Michigan. And no, I'm not kidding. It's interesting because it's the lone MAC game here. They have one singular MAC game. So a lot of people are probably going to like shit on us. Why is there a MAC game? I think it makes the slate very interesting. Very, very interesting. It's not like it's a super obvious one to read either, because Ohio is only a 1-point favorite in this one, and they are on the road. And then the over-under is at 58.5. So it's not like an obvious smash spot for either team, but you can make a case for a lot of plays here. Ohio is priced to the basement. They're priced to the basement. And I think the offense is pretty darn good. So let's take a look at Ohio. This is a team that finished only 3-9 last year. They've gotten off to a better start this year, so we have to find out, is it for real? A lot of these MAC schools, you have to take a look at their non-conference schedule because a lot of them just collect paychecks. Like, go ahead and take a look at Kent State's non-conference schedule. Who'd they play? Oklahoma. Well, I guess Oklahoma stinks now. Georgia. Somebody else really good, right? So how much can you usually really take away from these statistics and these metrics from their non-conference? So taking a look at these 2 teams, Ohio did play Penn State and Iowa State. Not exactly 2 juggernauts, but 2 good teams and definitely 2 very good defenses. Western Michigan played Michigan State, who stinks, and then Pitt, who's not as good as they were last year. So I think Ohio has had the more difficult schedule. I also think Ohio's been the better team overall. Their offense is definitely the best unit in this game. They're ranked 80th in PPA. Ohio's defense stinks, though, right? They're a bottom 8 unit. Whereas Western Michigan, it just isn't good. They're bottom 15 on both sides of the ball at this point this year. That's kind of what I expected from Western Michigan because they lost a lot from last year, a lot of their impact players, and they just haven't really shown they can replace it so far. As far as the Ohio offense, I think that's, again, where my interest is going to be in this game. But there's a number of players I can make a case for. So let's kind of sift through the sand here. I think this is a very important one for the slate, is knowing who to play on Ohio. So let's try to figure it out, shall we? The tempo is nothing special, but in non-paycheck games, so again, not the ones where they're playing Penn State or Iowa State, they're averaging 6.5 yards per play against Florida Atlantic, 8.4 yards per play against a bad Fordham team, 6.5 against Kent State, and 9.7 last week against Akron. So every single game, all 4 of them, they've averaged at least 6.5 yards per play against the bottom 15 Western Michigan defense. I guess that's what we should expect in this matchup. And that's pretty good. Tim Albin is the new head coach. He was the offensive coordinator under program legend Frank Solich. And he was running the offense for Solich. And those were a lot of good offenses. If you remember Rourke's brother, that was like when he was running wild and averaging like 35 fantasy points per game. I'm not sure Curtis Rourke is quite that good, but he's been off to a very good start. And it's the same offensive coordinator the same coach that was the offensive coordinator for his brother. So there's a lot of continuity there that I like. In their 2 MAC games, they threw the ball 39 times against Kent State and 27 against Akron. They were up pretty big in that Akron game. They scored on I think it was the first play of the game, might have been the second, that they had the lead from the 12-second mark on, to give you an idea of why they only threw the ball 27 times, right? So traditionally, their teams have had a dual threat quarterback that they run a lot, and they even tried to do that last year with Amari Rodgers, the UNLV transfer, that really siphoned from Curtis Rourke's usage. This year, it's all Rourke's show. He's only 6.2K. He runs a little bit, but that's not really his style, and they've been throwing the ball more because, again, they don't have that elite dual threat guy to work with, and they're not pretending that they do, and he's been extremely effective. Their passing attack ranks 19th in success rate. 19th. That's really good. Again, they've had 2 difficult games on that schedule. 52nd in PPA. They're facing a Western Michigan team that ranks outside the top 100 in every single passing metric I have. I think Curtis Rourke is a very good option at 6.2K. I know there's a lot of good paydown options. Curtis Rourke, I'm not sure if I'm ready to say he's my favorite, but I am absolutely considering Curtis Rourke in all formats for sure. If you're looking to stack him, the most interesting guy, and I'm going to get his name wrong, Wiggles. I'm just going to call him Wiggles. Sammy Wiggles. Sound like Gus Johnson here with the stupid nicknames on the fly. Sammy Wiggles has been a stud. He was the guy I mentioned who took, I think it was the first play of the game. Again, 12 seconds into the first quarter, he took a 75-yard pass to the house. My issue is the ADOT with these wide receivers really isn't great. So he's been catching a lot of screen passes and somehow turning those into explosive plays. Whether or not it's going to continue, it's not exactly the most reliable thing, but he is the top guy in this offense. In the last 2 weeks, he's seen 14 targets, which leads the team. Second has been Miles Cross at 4.4K. And then you have Jones priced down at 3.6K, Jacoby Jones, who had a big game last week, big game against Fordham. I'm kind of throwing the Fordham stats out because that was a 59-52 game. I doubt we really get too many 59-52 games. We could, because Ohio's all offense and no defense this year. But I think Jones is a tournament play only. I think Cross and Sammy Wiggles are viable in all formats. I think Sammy Wiggles is my favorite play, and if I'm playing cash, I think getting the Wiggles is the way to go. I think that's the way to go. As far as Western Michigan's defense goes, they don't really totally suck, but they also aren't good. They've had 2 MAC games so far, and they gave up over 400 yards in both of those against Ball State and EMU. So I'm not really loving that. Also gave up over 6 yards per play in both of those. So I think Ohio should expect to get over 400 yards, get in the end zone about 5 times, hopefully. You can also attack the rushing game here. Western Michigan's really bad against the rush, 123rd in rushing success rate. Sai Bangura is the top running back. We can see here he's had 3 games that you would consider starting him against Florida State, 15 fantasy points. That's okay. Kent State, 23. That's really good. Then Akron last week, he found the end zone 4 times for 36 fantasy points. Does he find the end zone 4 times in this one? Probably not. Is he viable in all formats? Sure. Is he a must play? No. Okay, looking at Western Michigan. That was a lot on Ohio. I think I spent more on Ohio than any team, including Alabama and Tennessee. So I think it's a big one for the slate. Okay, Western Michigan, the offense isn't great, but Ohio's defense is absolutely dreadful. 118th in success rate. I'm going to boil down Western Michigan to his 2 players. That's their 2 best skill players. Corey Crooms, the wide receiver, they graduated, or one of them transferred, but they lost a few very good receivers from a year ago. Crooms, probably most well known for turning one of the Pittsburgh cornerbacks into a pretzel last year. Had some good performances against Power 5 teams. We see there he's played in 2 MAC games. One, he only had 13 fantasy points. The other, in week 2 against Ball State, he had 31 fantasy points. I think he's a pretty great player. I think he's their best skill guy at 6.6K against terrible defense. In a game they could be playing from behind. I think I like it. PFF really hates this Ohio pass defense. They rank him 128th in the country in pass defense. Yeah, that's not good. Not good whatsoever. All right. If you're looking at the running back room, Sean Tyler, he doesn't get enough rushing workload for me to be super interested. Doesn't get a ton of receptions, but he is very dangerous and is facing a bad team at 6.4K. You could do worse things. Last but not least, actually probably least, last but least, Wisconsin versus Michigan State. Michigan State's pass defense is terrible. That's where every handicap with them starts. That's why if you stack CJ Stroud in tournaments last week, you may or may not have gotten yourself a bink or two. But they rank 128th in passing success rate, 122nd passing PPA. This is after a 2021 in which they somehow had a very successful Big Ten season despite ranking dead last in the entire country in passing yards against. So Wisconsin had a blow up last week in the passing game. Of course, it's do you think it's going to continue against a bad Michigan State defense? I mean, Michigan State is so bad. Of course, it could continue, but Graham Mertz is also really bad. He had one good game against a terrible Northwestern team. I'm not playing Graham Mertz this week. At 5.3K, you can make the case. You could even stack him with DK at 5.6K, but it's just not for me, really. It's just really not for me. A tournament play only for sure. I actually could make a case for DK because he's been a target hog. He has double-digit targets in 2 straight games. Can we expect a 50-point outing from him every week? No, you'd be stupid. Wisconsin has had a terrible passing attack for forever. I think if you're playing anyone here, it's DK. Michigan State has been a lot better against the rush than the pass. Braylon Allen is an elite talent. Ches Malusi is out for this game. So Braylon Allen could get there, but their offensive line just hasn't been as good as in years past. It's 81st in line yards. So I think if you're playing anyone in Wisconsin, it's probably DK. And Braylon Allen, of course, could always rush for 5 touchdowns in a game that they're 7.5-point favorites, but Wisconsin just hasn't been as good as they have in past years. As far as Michigan State goes, Wisconsin's defense is not quite the elite level it was in the past, but they are still 25th in PPA, 19th in explosiveness. Jim Leonard's taken over as the head coach. I think Jim Leonard is one of the brightest minds defensively in the entire world as far as football goes, right? So I'm not playing Peyton Thorne. I'm not playing the running backs because they've been bad anyway. But if you're really going to play somebody, Jaden Reed at 5.1K, you could play against a Wisconsin secondary that hasn't been great. 64th in success rate against the pass, 62nd in passing explosiveness. Jaden Reed is a 1,000-yard wide receiver who has had some decent weeks, and that DraftKings just keeps putting around 5K, which is just simply too cheap. Do I love the matchup? No. Could they be playing from behind? Yes. Is he an elite CFF receiver? Questionable, but he's close. All right, guys, that wraps up the slate solo pod. We went 67 minutes. A few quick plugs. If you like props, prize picks, be sure to check out Fantasy Points. That's Fantasy Points. Check out their CFB subscriptions. But dropping some prize picks over there this year. If you're looking for CFF breakdowns, which you probably are, DFS breakdowns, I had one for Thursday night slate, so I need to go check and see how those are doing. Hopefully they went well. But we've been doing pretty well. We crushed Friday slates last week. Writing up all the mid-game slates, and then we have guys covering Saturdays as well. So if you're interested in more DFS action or the Devi community, you need to check out Devi Watch. That's Devi Watch, the lead CFF writer there this year. Very excited to be doing that. It's a great opportunity, and I'm loving it. So be sure to check that out. I'll drop a link in the description. Other than that, thanks for watching. As always, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all next week.